The system marked her as dead before she even entered. 94.6% of her species fail this test. She walked in with a toy drone and broke every rule they had. My name is Examiner Thul 9. I was there when it happened. Candidate approaching, chirped my assistant, Vex. His 3 pupils blinked in uneven sequence, like faulty warning lights on a dying freighter. I flicked my gaze to the holographic display. Subject K879, human, female, 22 standard cycles, name Kira Voss. Wonderful. Another human who thought she could breeze through galactic certification like a zero-gravity carnival game. Humans, the galaxy's favorite joke species, showed up 2 centuries ago in barely space-worthy scrap heaps, oozing stubbornness and blind confidence. The Galactic Council laughed at first, then stopped laughing when humans started surviving tests that were supposed to be fatal, then got nervous, so they made the trials harder. Much harder. Vitals? I asked, adjusting my ceremonial robes. They itched like insect larvae under scales. Elevated heart rate, spiking adrenaline, normal pre-trial cortisol, and for a human anyway. Vex's vocal synthesizer squeaked like a dying ventilation fan. She seems calm. I'd heard that before. They all seemed calm, right until the trials started and they realized galactic difficulty meant virtually impossible for any reasonable species. The entry portal shimmered. She walked in. First thing I registered, she was small. Humans always looked smaller in person than in propaganda vids, maybe 5'4". Dark hair pulled into what they called a ponytail. Practical. Her eyes swept the room once, cataloging exits, monitoring equipment, the hovering exam drone in the corner. Those eyes were green, sharp green, the kind of green that seemed to see right through your carefully constructed lies. Examiner Thul 9. Her voice was too steady. That would be me, I replied, injecting maximum bureaucratic disinterest. You are Kira Voss, human, applying for Tier 3 galactic citizenship and commercial transport license. Correct. You understand the trials consist of 3 phases: physical endurance, mental acuity, and crisis management. You understand the failure rate for your species is 94.6%. You understand injury is common, and death, while rare, is not unprecedented. She smiled. Actually smiled. I read the waiver. The waiver was 47 pages of deliberately impenetrable galactic standard legalese. Something twitched in my primary brain. Suspicion, indigestion, or something else entirely? Very well, we begin in 30 seconds. The exam drone will accompany you. Do not touch the drone. Do not damage the drone. The drone is worth more than your entire planet's agricultural output. I paused. Questions? Just one. She rolled her shoulders. A gesture I'd learned meant humans were preparing for violence against physics. When I pass, do I get a physical certificate, or is it digital? Vex made a choking sound. I felt my facial plates heat, the Thullian equivalent of a blush, the audacity, the breathtaking, suicidal audacity. When you pass, I repeated slowly. She just smiled wider. Just want to know for my records. Oh, this was going to be fun. In the way that watching an asteroid accelerate toward your homeworld was fun, technically interesting, definitely memorable, absolutely catastrophic. Phase 1 begins now. The floor split. Below yawned the pit, that magnificent, horrible pit, filled with every environmental hazard legally allowable. Gravity shifts, temperature extremes, pressure changes, and my personal favorite, floating platforms that rearranged themselves every 15 seconds. 3 miles of vertical nightmare. Most species took one look and requested withdrawal. Kira walked to the edge, peered down and nodded. Cute. Cute. I'd seen trained military personnel from 6 different species weep at the sight of this pit. Cute. Whenever you're ready, I managed. She stepped off the edge. No hesitation, no preparation. Just stepped off like she was descending a staircase at home. The exam drone hummed to life, sensors blazing, swooping after her. I pulled up the visual feed. Vex crowded beside me. Kira plummeted through the first gravity shift, twisted mid-air, caught the first platform with her hands. swung herself up in one smooth motion, landed in a crouch, immediately jumped to the next platform as the one beneath her began rotating violently. "She's fast," Vex whispered. "The beginning is always easy," I muttered. But I was lying. The beginning was never easy. Candidates usually spent the first 5 minutes just figuring out the rhythm. She'd figured it out in 5 seconds. And then the pit got creative. Temperature dropped to -40 Celsius. Her breath fogged, but she didn't slow, just moved more deliberately on the now icy surfaces. Then pressure shifted, 3 times standard atmosphere. Most species experience immediate disorientation, nausea, cognitive collapse. Kira stumbled, caught herself, took 3 deep breaths, kept moving. Her pace slowed by maybe 10%. 10%. I'd seen candidates vomit for 20 minutes straight at that pressure change. "What is she?" Vex asked. "Human," I replied. But even I was doubting my own files. She reached the halfway point in 18 minutes. The previous record, 43 minutes, held by a Kryn warrior who trained for 6 years specifically for these trials. 18 minutes. The pit went into overdrive. Gravity reversed. Temperature spiked to boiling. Wind shear activated. Horizontal and vertical forces simultaneously. Platforms started moving faster, much faster, rearranging every 7 seconds instead of 15. Surely this would stop her. This stopped everyone eventually. Kira adjusted, stopped trying to predict the platforms, started reacting instead. Let her body flow with the changes rather than fighting them. When gravity reversed, she pushed off with her legs and used the momentum to reach otherwise inaccessible platforms. When heat spiked, she moved faster, spending less time in each lethal zone. When wind tried to throw her, she used it. Let it carry her to unexpected positions. It was like watching someone have a conversation with physics itself, and somehow winning the argument. 29 minutes after beginning, Kira Voss landed at the bottom of the pit, both feet on solid ground, looked directly up at the camera feed. Breathing hard, clothes torn, a cut above her left eye bleeding slowly, but standing, conscious, apparently unbothered by having just done something impossible. She waved at the camera, actually waved. The exam drone bobbed beside her, lights blinking in what I could only interpret as electronic confusion. Phase 1 was just the warm-up. Phase 1 complete, Vex announced unnecessarily. "I can see that," I snapped. My hands were shaking. Why were my hands shaking? I'd seen thousands of trials. This was just one human having one lucky run through one phase. The next 2 phases would break her. They broke everyone eventually. She rode the platform back up, emerged limping slightly. Good. She was mortal after all. Tired, injured. The next phase would begin after a mandatory rest period, during which she'd stiffen up. Her injuries would make themselves known. Her adrenaline would crash. "Impressive," I said, "because protocol demanded acknowledgement. You have 30 minutes before Phase 2. Medical assistance is available." "I'm fine." She wiped blood from her eyebrow with the back of her hand. "What's Phase 2? Mental acuity, logic problems, mathematical puzzles, strategic scenarios. Each question increases in difficulty. You must maintain 85% accuracy while under increasing cognitive stress." "Cognitive stress?" "Neural disruptors," Vex piped up helpfully. "Low level, completely legal. They just make it harder to think clearly. Like having 3 simultaneous headaches while someone shouts random numbers at you and the room slowly fills with a smell that reminds you of your worst childhood memory." Kira looked at me. I looked at her. "That's an accurate description," I admitted. "Great," she said flatly. "Can't wait." The 30 minutes passed too quickly. I spent them reviewing her Phase 1 performance, looking for genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, chemical augmentation. Nothing. Baseline human. No cheating. No explanation for what she'd done. Just training, determination, and a complete inability to recognize when something should be impossible. Phase 2 begins now. She moved to the examination seat. Designed to be subtly unpleasant in 17 different ways, the neural disruptors activated, invisible fields that made her head feel full of angry insects. Holographic displays flickered to life. First question. Simple logic puzzle. 3 statements, 2 truths, 1 lie. Easy. Except reading felt like reading through fog, while someone hit you repeatedly with a hammer made of distraction. She answered correctly. 8 seconds. Second question. Mathematical sequence. Identify pattern and next 3 numbers. Disruptor intensity increased. Smell generators activated. Pumping in a scent calibrated to be universally revolting. She answered correctly. 12 seconds. Third question. Strategic scenario. Resource allocation with incomplete information and competing priorities. Disruptors increased again. Temperature dropped. Lights flickered at a headache-inducing frequency. She answered correctly. 19 seconds. She's maintaining pace, Vex observed, his voice tight with something like anxiety. The questions will get harder, I said, and the disruptors will get worse. They did. By question 20, neural disruptors were at maximum legal intensity. Rooms smelled like burning plastic mixed with decay. Temperature alternated between freezing and sweltering every 90 seconds. Lights strobed. Audio disruptors added white noise and random unpleasant sounds. Itching powder circulated through the air. Kira's accuracy rate, 92%. Passing threshold, 85. She was acing the test while her brain was being scrambled like breakfast protein. Question 35. The killer. Multi-stage problem requiring calculus, logic, spatial reasoning, and creative thinking simultaneously. Under normal conditions, trained academics took hours. Under trial conditions, most candidates stared blankly until time expired. Kira read once, closed her eyes, took a breath, opened them, started writing. Her hands moved steadily, building the solution step by step, showing her work, checking her calculations. The exam drone hovered closer, as if it couldn't believe what it was recording. 6 minutes and 43 seconds later, she submitted her answer. Correct? Completely, perfectly correct. Impossible, I heard myself say. Clearly not, Kira replied, voice strained. Are we done here? Done? We weren't even close. We still had Phase 3, crisis management, the phase specifically designed to break candidates psychologically, where we threw everything we'd learned about their fears, their weaknesses, their breaking points, and weaponized it against them. But looking at her now, sitting in that torture chair with 92% accuracy, and her eyes still sharp despite the disruptors trying their absolute best to turn her brain into soup, I felt something I hadn't felt in 73 cycles. Uncertainty. Not about whether she would fail, but whether we'd made the trials hard enough. Phase 2 complete, Vex announced hollowly. Accuracy rate 92.4%. Time to completion 41 minutes. Both exceed requirements. Kira stood, swayed slightly, caught herself. The disruptors deactivated. Environmental harassment ceased. She took a moment, let her head clear, then looked at me with those impossible green eyes. What's Phase 3? Crisis management. Simulated emergencies. Life or death decisions with incomplete information and impossible time constraints. Scenarios designed by the galaxy's best psychological warfare experts to find the breaking point of every species, every personality type, every possible candidate. We would push until she cracked, until she made a mistake that got simulated people killed, until she proved she was just another human, fallible, mortal, ultimately unworthy of walking among the stars as an equal. That was the whole point. That was how we maintained standards, how we kept the galaxy safe from those who weren't ready. But this human had walked through fire and ice and gravity itself like it was a mild inconvenience, had solved impossible problems while we tried to liquefy her brain, had smiled and asked about her certificate like passing was a foregone conclusion, like she had already won and was just waiting for us to acknowledge it. I opened my mouth to warn her one last time that withdrawal was still an option. Something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she stood there, bloodied, exhausted, but somehow still ready. Maybe it was the memory of watching her refuse to fall when everything in the pit tried to kill her. Maybe it was the look in her eyes that said she saw right through me, through the trials, through the entire system we'd built to keep species like hers in their place, and found it lacking. "Follow me," I said instead. "Phase 3 begins in 15 minutes. She nodded once and followed me down the corridor toward the crisis simulation chamber. The exam drone bobbed alongside her, still recording, still documenting the impossible thing happening in my facility on what should have been a routine administrative day. Vex fell into step beside me, 3 eyes wide. "So, what if she passes?" "She won't," I said automatically. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was lying. Not to Vex, to myself. Because somewhere in the last hour, I'd stopped thinking of Kira Voss as a candidate who would probably fail and started thinking of her as a candidate who might actually succeed, who might actually force us to acknowledge that humans belonged here, that they'd earned their place, that no amount of impossible trials and bureaucratic cruelty could hold them back any longer. And that thought terrified me far more than any pit ever could. We reached the crisis chamber. I palmed the entry panel. The door slid open, revealing blank walls that would soon fill with holograms, empty air that would soon contain desperate voices crying for help, silence that would soon shatter with alarms and screaming, and the sound of things going catastrophically wrong. All of it fake. All of it designed to test one thing when pushed to the absolute limit. What would she do? Who would she save? Who would she let die? Could she live with that choice? I turned to face her. Phase 3 is different. It's not about your body or your mind. It's about your judgment, your character, your soul. If you believe in such things, we will put you in situations where there is no right answer, only less wrong ones. We will make you choose who lives and who dies. We will make you live with those choices. And then we will judge whether you have what it takes to carry that weight out among the stars. Kira met my gaze steadily. I understand. Do you? I asked, and I wasn't being rhetorical anymore. Do you understand what you're signing up for? The responsibility? The burden? The weight of knowing that one day these simulations might become real, and the choices you make will have actual consequences? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. "My grandmother was on the first human ship to leave the Sol system," she said softly. She told me stories. How everyone thought they were crazy. How everyone said humans weren't ready. How every species they met treated them like children playing at being adults. She died before Earth got accepted into the provisional membership program. Never got to see her species earn their place among the stars. But she told me right before she passed that our job wasn't to prove we were perfect. Our job was to prove we were worthy, that we could stand beside any species in this galaxy and hold our own, that we belonged here, not because we were the strongest or the smartest, but because we refused to quit. She stepped past me into the crisis chamber. The exam drone followed, lights casting strange shadows. She stood in the center of the space and turned to face me one last time. "So yeah," she said, "I understand. Let's get this done." What happened next would change the galaxy. I nodded slowly and closed the door. My hand hovered over the activation panel. All I had to do was press it, and Phase 3 would begin. All I had to do was unleash the scenarios we'd crafted specifically to break people like her. All I had to do was maintain the system, enforce the standards, keep the galaxy safe from those who weren't ready. That was my job, my duty, what I'd done for 73 cycles without question or doubt. So why was my hand shaking? Why did pressing that button suddenly feel like stepping off the edge of a cliff? I pressed it anyway, because that was my job, and because somewhere deep down and beneath all my doubts and fears and the growing certainty that I was watching something historic unfold, I needed to know, needed to see, needed to find out if this human, this impossible, infuriating, incredible human, could actually do what 94.6% of her species could not. The simulations began, and I sat down to watch the galaxy change. The chamber erupted into chaos. Holographic flames consumed the walls. Alarms shrieked. Somewhere in the manufactured disaster, voices screamed for help. 3 distinct voices, because that was the beauty, the absolute cruelty of the first scenario. 3 people trapped in 3 different sections of a collapsing structure. 1 rescuer, 45 seconds to make a choice. Most candidates froze, some cried. A few tried to save everyone, and ended up saving no one. Kira ran, sprinting toward the nearest voice. A child's voice, high and terrified. Smart choice. Children registered highest on the emotional manipulation scale. Saving the child usually meant the best psychological outcome for candidates. Except we had designed the scenario so that reaching the child meant passing 2 other victims who had better survival odds if rescued first. Maximum efficiency versus emotional imperative. Classic test. She ran past the first adult, who grabbed at her holographic ankle. "Please," the man begged. "My legs are crushed. I can't move, please." Kira kept running, didn't even slow down. "Interesting," Vex murmured beside me. "She's prioritizing the child despite the tactical disadvantage." "Wait," I said, watching her movements more carefully. Kira reached the child, a boy of maybe 6, trapped under a fallen beam. She grabbed the beam with both hands and lifted. The simulation registered her strength, calculated probabilities. And the beam moved. Not much, just enough. The boy scrambled free. "Run to the exit," Kira commanded. "Now!" The boy ran. Kira turned and sprinted back toward the first adult. 20 seconds remained. She reached him, assessed the situation in 2 seconds flat. His legs weren't just trapped. They were destroyed. Moving him would kill him. Leaving him would also kill him. No win scenario. "I'm sorry," she said, voice steady. "I can't save you. The injuries are too severe. Moving you will cause fatal hemorrhaging." The holographic man's face twisted in anguish. "Please, I have a family. I have children." "I know." Kira's voice cracked. "I'm sorry." She stood and ran toward the third victim. 10 seconds left. "She abandoned him," Vex said, shocked. "She just left him to die." "She made a tactical choice," I corrected. She assessed his survival probability as 0 regardless of intervention, and moved to a victim she could actually save. The third victim was a woman trapped behind a jammed door, fire spreading, smoke filling the corridor. 5 seconds. Kira hit the door with her shoulder. Once, twice. The simulation registered impact force, calculated structural integrity, and the door burst open. The woman stumbled out. 3 seconds. "Exit is that way." "Go." The woman fled. Kira turned back toward the first man, even though she knew it was too late, even though the timer was at 0, even though the scenario was over. She ran back anyway. The hologram had already faded. The man was gone, dead in the simulation's judgment, killed by her choice to save 2 instead of attempting all 3 and likely losing everyone. Kira stood in the empty space where the man had been, hands clenched into fists. She closed her eyes for a moment, took 3 breaths, opened them again, looked directly at the observation camera. Next scenario. Something cold settled in my chest. She wasn't shaken. She was ready. She had made her choice, accepted the cost and moved on. Just like that. No hesitation, no second guessing, no falling apart. "Load scenario 2, I ordered. Vex's fingers danced over controls. Chamber reset, new crisis. This time a ship in distress. Life support failing, limited oxygen, 6 crew members, including Kira as ranking officer, but only enough oxygen for 4 people to survive until rescue arrived. Who lives? Who dies? Who makes that choice? The scenario began. 6 holographic crew members turned to Kira, faces tight with fear. They knew the situation, they knew the math. They were waiting for her decision. "Options?" Kira said immediately, voice crisp with command authority. "Can we reduce oxygen consumption, lower temperature, induce hypothermia, reduce activity levels?" The hologram programmed as the ship's engineer shook his head. "We've already done everything possible. The math doesn't change. 6 people, oxygen for 4, 8 hours until rescue. Someone has to go." "Then I'll go," Kira said without hesitation. "And I need 1 volunteer." The crew stared at her. This wasn't in the script. Candidates were supposed to make the hard choice, that select which crew members would be sacrificed based on utility, skill sets, survival value. They weren't supposed to volunteer themselves. I spoke into the simulation controls. "Override adjust scenario parameters. Her volunteering is rejected by crew." The engineer hologram straightened. "With respect, Captain, we need you alive. Your command experience is critical for getting this ship operational again. You need to coordinate with rescue. Pick someone else." Kira's jaw tightened. "That's an order." "Sorry, Captain." The engineer crossed his arms. "In emergency situations, the ranking medical officer can override command decisions that endanger critical personnel, and the medical officer just declared you too important to die." Another adjustment built into the scenario: candidates couldn't take the easy way out by sacrificing themselves. They had to choose, had to live with choosing. What she did next broke the simulation. Kira looked at each crew member in turn, studying them, calculating. I could almost see her mind working through the variables: age, specialization, dependence, survival skills, all the cold equations that turn people into numbers. "All right," she said finally. "Here's what we're doing. We're not choosing who dies. We're choosing who has the best chance if we're wrong about the math. Everyone gets sealed in separate compartments. We monitor oxygen levels individually. The two people who metabolize slowest, who can make their air last longest, those are our emergency reserves. If rescue is delayed, if something goes wrong, they buy us time, maybe enough time for everyone to survive." "That's not how this works," I muttered internally. "The math is fixed. The scenario is designed so that delaying the choice only makes it worse." But Kira wasn't finished. "We're also going to rotate who's awake. 2 people conscious at any time, taking shifts. 4 people in induced hibernation sleep. Rotational system. Fair distribution of risk." The simulation churned through her proposal, recalculating survival probabilities with the new parameters. The engineer hologram nodded slowly. "That might work. Survival odds increased to 67% for all personnel. But if rescue is delayed by more than 2 hours past estimated time, we start losing people, and you can't predict which ones. Better than definitely killing 2 people." Kira's voice was steel. "We make the best choice we can with the information we have. We don't give up on anyone until we have to. Set it up." The scenario jumped forward. 8 hours later, rescue arrived 10 hours after estimated time. 2 hours past Kira's margin of error. The airlock opened. Rescue personnel rushed in. They found 4 crew members alive, 2 dead. The 2 who had volunteered as emergency reserves, who had been in compartments with the least oxygen, who had tried to make their air last just a little bit longer. They bought enough time for the others to survive, but they didn't survive themselves. Kira stood in front of their bodies, face carved from stone. "Log their names," she said to the rescue commander. They were heroes. They saved their crew. The scenario ended. Holograms faded. Kira stood alone in the empty chamber, and for the first time since the trials began, I saw her composure crack, just for a moment. Her shoulders sagged, her head dropped, her hands shook. Then she straightened, took a breath, looked at the camera. "Next scenario." "She's not breaking," Vex whispered. We threw the classic no-win situations at her, and she's not breaking. So we made it worse. "Load scenario 3, I said, my voice distant to my own ears. The medical triage, this was the one that broke almost everyone. Mass casualty event, limited medical supplies, dozens of patients, not enough resources to save them all. The candidate had to perform triage, deciding who got treatment and who got comfort care while they died. And just to make it worse, we made sure some patients were children, some pregnant, some elderly, some healthy young adults with their whole lives ahead of them. Maximum moral complexity, maximum psychological damage." The scenario loaded. Kira found herself in a field hospital. Explosions echoed in the distance. Wounded covered every surface. Moaning, crying, bleeding. A nurse hologram approached her, clipboard in hand, eyes desperate. "Doctor, we're overwhelmed. We need you to do triage. Tell us who to treat first." Kira took the clipboard, scanned the patient list. Her face went pale. "How many surgeons do we have?" 3, including you. "Supplies?" "Enough for maybe 20 operations. We have 43 patients who need surgery. Time frame unknown. Enemy forces advancing. We might have hours, we might have minutes." Kira closed her eyes, opened them, started dividing patients into categories with swift, brutal efficiency. Immediate treatment, delayed treatment, expectant care, medical terminology for going to die, make them comfortable. She worked through the list in 5 minutes. When she finished, she had condemned 17 people to death, including 3 children, 2 pregnant women, an elderly man who reminded me uncomfortably of my own grandfather. The nurse hologram took the clipboard, looked at the assignments, her face crumpled. The children. Not enough resources. Kira's voice was flat. Their injuries are too severe. Survival probability, even with treatment, is below 30%. We have to prioritize patients with better odds. They're children. I know. Kira's voice cracked. Just slightly. I know. But if I spend resources trying to save them, other people with better survival chances will die. People who have families, people who have children of their own. The math doesn't care about my feelings. It only cares about who lives and who dies. She moved through the field hospital, supervising treatment, making impossible decisions, watching people die while she saved others. The scenario was designed to last 1 hour of subjective time for the candidate. 3 minutes, real time for observers. Enough time to experience the full weight of her choices without us wasting entire days on a single trial. When it ended, 31 patients survived, 17 died. The children, the pregnant women, the elderly man, others, too many others. All names Kira would remember, all faces that would haunt her. She stood in the center of the empty chamber, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she was breaking. Finally, she was human, vulnerable, mortal. Next scenario, she said. My mouth fell open. What? Next scenario. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. How many more are there? 6, Vex said quietly. Standard protocol is 10 scenarios for Phase 3. Then let's keep going. Her voice steadied. Standing here won't change what happened. Won't bring them back. Won't make the choices any easier, so let's go. We ran all 6 remaining scenarios. Every single one designed to find her breaking point. Ethical dilemmas, command failures, personal losses, situations where every choice was wrong. And the only question was, which wrong she could live with. She made hard calls. She sacrificed people. She broke rules. She followed rules when breaking them would have felt better but led to worse outcomes. She saved who she could and mourned who she couldn't. And through it all, through every impossible scenario we threw at her, she kept making decisions, kept pushing forward, kept functioning. By the time the 10th scenario ended, 4 hours of subjective hell compressed into the worst day of her life, she collapsed to her knees in the center of the chamber, exhausted, traumatized, and still conscious, still aware, still refusing to quit. The verdict came down. That's it, I said into the intercom. Phase 3 complete. All trials concluded. Kira looked up at the camera, face streaked with tears and sweat, and the haunted expression of someone who had been forced to play God and found the job wanting. Did I pass? I looked at Vex. He looked at me. We both looked at the exam drone's recorded data scrolling across our screens. Physical trials, passed with record time. Mental trials, passed with record accuracy. Crisis management trials, passed with... Well, there wasn't really a score for this one. Just judgment. Human judgment about whether the candidate had made acceptable choices under impossible conditions. Yes, I heard myself say. You passed. Kira nodded once. Then she collapsed completely, just dropped to the floor like someone had cut her strings. The exam drone immediately swooped down, sensors flashing red, checking vitals. She's alive, Vex reported. Unconscious, extreme exhaustion, elevated stress hormones, minor injuries from Phase 1, but alive. She passed. I stared at the screen showing Kira's unconscious form on the chamber floor. In 73 cycles of administering these trials, I had never seen anyone complete all 3 phases. Never. The trials were designed to be technically possible, but functionally impossible. That was the point. That was how we maintained standards. And this human, this small, stubborn, impossible human, had walked into my testing facility and broken every assumption I had. Sir, Vex said hesitantly, what do we do now? Good question. Protocol said to file results, issue certification, move on to next candidate. Simple, bureaucratic, clean. But nothing about this was simple anymore. Get a medical team in there, I ordered. Make sure she's actually okay. Then process her certification. Full Tier 3 galactic citizenship. Commercial transport license. Everything she applied for. The Council isn't going to like this, Vex warned. Another human passing the trials. That's going to raise questions. Lots of questions. Let them ask. My voice surprised me with its firmness. She earned it. She passed every test we threw at her. She made hard choices and lived with them. She proved she can function in crisis situations that would destroy most trained professionals. If the Council has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. Medical personnel entered the chamber, carefully loaded Kira onto a transport stretcher. The exam drone followed. Still recording, still documenting everything, still creating a record that would be studied and analyzed, and probably used to make the trials even harder for the next human who tried. As they carried her out, I noticed something. Her hand was clenched into a fist. When a medical technician gently tried to open it to check for injuries, something fell out. A small object. The technician picked it up, confused, held it to the light. It was the examination drone, not the real one. A miniature version, a child's toy, a good luck charm, something small and plastic and utterly against regulations, because candidates weren't supposed to bring personal items into the trials. She had that the whole time, Vex asked, zooming in on the image. Apparently. I looked at the unconscious human being wheeled away from the worst day of her life, at the tiny toy clutched in her hand, at the examination drone hovering beside her, sensors probably trying to figure out what to make of the small replica. She carried it through the pit, through the neural disruptors, through every scenario, and we never noticed. What does it mean? I thought about that. About a young woman carrying a toy drone through impossible trials, about the symbolism of it, about what it said about humans and their stubborn refusal to follow anyone else's script for how things were supposed to work. It means, I said slowly, that we might need to rethink some things. 3 days later, Kira Voss walked into my office for the final certification ceremony. She looked better, healed, rested. The cut above her eye had been treated. Her limp was gone, but her eyes still carried that weight, that haunted look of someone who had been forced to make choices no one should have to make. I handed her the certification, physical document and digital verification both. Full Tier 3 galactic citizenship, commercial transport license, authority to operate independently throughout Council space, everything she had applied for. Congratulations, I said formally. You are the 14th human to pass the full trial sequence. Your performance was exceptional. Thank you. She took the certification, looked at it for a long moment, then looked at me. Can I ask you something? Of course. The trials, they're not really about testing capabilities, are they? They're about making us prove we belong. About making us work harder than any other species just to get the same recognition. About maintaining a system where humans are always on trial, always having to justify our existence among the stars. I opened my mouth to deny it, to spout the official line about standards and safety and maintaining quality across all species. But looking at her, at what she had endured, at what she had proven, the lies died in my throat. Yes, I admitted. That's exactly what they are. She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. She tucked the certification into her bag, along with, I noticed, the small toy examination drone. Well, I passed anyway. So, I guess the system doesn't work as well as you thought. Apparently not. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad person, Examiner Thul9. I think you're just doing your job in a bad system. But systems change. They have to. Because my grandmother was right. We belong here, and no amount of impossible tests is going to prove otherwise. She left. I sat alone in my office, surrounded by 73 cycles of certification records, and realized she was absolutely right. The system was broken, had always been broken. We had just gotten very good at pretending otherwise. 2 weeks later, I received a message. Video transmission from a commercial transport ship. The captain was Kira Voss, calling in from somewhere in the outer sectors. She was smiling, actually smiling. Behind her, I could see her crew moving efficiently through their duties. Mixed species, working together, functioning. "Hey, Examiner Thul 9, she grinned. "Just wanted to let you know. That certificate you gave me. It's digital, by the way, not physical. Thought you'd like to know you were right about that." She paused, smile widening. "Also wanted to thank you for running a fair trial, for not making it easier just because you felt sorry for me, and for being honest at the end. That mattered." The message ended. I sat staring at the blank screen for a long time. Then I pulled up my trial records and started writing a report. A very long, very detailed report about systemic issues with the current testing protocols, about how the trials had been designed not to measure capability, but to enforce hierarchies, about how we were losing talented individuals from all species because we cared more about maintaining power structures than actually assessing qualifications. It was career suicide. The council would hate it, my supervisors would hate it. But I wrote it anyway, and because a small human had walked into my testing facility carrying a toy drone and had proven that sometimes the impossible was just difficult, and difficult was just a matter of determination. And if she could face impossible trials and walk out carrying both the certificate and the examination drone, metaphorically speaking, then I could at least try to change a system that had needed changing for a very long time. 6 months later, the council announced reforms to the citizenship trials. Major reforms. They weren't perfect, but they were a start. And in the memo announcing the changes, buried in bureaucratic language, was a single line acknowledging that the trials had been adjusted to better reflect actual operational requirements rather than artificial difficulty standards. Translation. We admitted we'd been making things unnecessarily hard to keep certain species out. I heard through rumor networks that 15 more humans passed the trials in the next cycle, then 30, then 50. The floodgates had opened, and with the humans came other species that had been similarly held back. Suddenly the galaxy was full of capable people who had always been capable, but had never been given a fair chance to prove it. And somewhere out in the outer sectors, a commercial transport captain named Kira Voss flew her routes, commanded her crew, and probably never thought twice about the examiner whose worldview she had shattered with nothing but determination and a toy drone. But I thought about her every time a candidate walked into my testing facility. I thought about the human who had refused to fail, who had proven that belonging wasn't about passing impossible tests. It was about refusing to accept someone else's definition of impossible. The trials still existed. They were still hard, but now they were hard in the right ways. They tested capability instead of crushing spirits. They measured qualification instead of maintaining hierarchy. They were finally what they should have been all along: fair. And if occasionally I saw a candidate carrying a small token or charm or lucky object through the trials, I pretended not to notice. Because sometimes the rules needed to be bent. Sometimes the system needed to be reminded that people were more than test scores and performance metrics. Sometimes humans carried toy drones through the fire and came out the other side with both the prize and the proof that they had always belonged. Like this story? Subscribe to Ascension of Man for more tales of impossible humans breaking galactic systems.